6:30 in the morning. What else would you be doing? Select things in Revit like a pro. That's what this is about. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of hints. It's more for kind of entry level and intermediate users. So if you're a pro, step away. But if you're not, please stay, and you can see some of the efficiency gains. I'm Niall, this is 8020 BIM. If you like this, you know what to do below in the like and comment. And just make sure to stay tuned for future updates as well. So hit the subscribe button. I've set a link for the models on this video so that you can go ahead and get them if you wish. And I also have a support page over at Buy Me a Coffee. You might want to consider giving me a little coffee. It won't be coffee, it'll probably be electricity I spend it on. And outside of that, I'm also going to set up a Discord server, and I have the link down below for that. I would be delighted to see the people who have commonly commented on the content to date to come over, to start chatting, to start helping each other out. I'd love to harbour a little community of people who are really interested in learning and developing. And to be honest with you, it's a good jumping off place for me to get ideas and to help people out where I can. Okay, so I'm Niall, it's 8020 BIM. Hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Step 1. How to select an element within Revit through the element ID function. So every element within Revit, be it a family or an in-place family or profile, is automatically given an element ID. And an element ID is basically a way of identifying an element within the overall project structure, okay, from an information perspective. So just to give you an example of this, when I select the roller shutter at the front of the building here, okay, I can go into the Manage tab and I can, under Inquiry, use IDs of selection. And this will actually give me the reporting value of the ID of the element within the model environment, okay? So why this is so important is this is a way for Revit to communicate meaningfully with other programs externally as well as to track elements internally. So for example, you may receive a clash detection report out of Navisworks. And that clash detection report out of Navisworks will give you an image of the clash, basically, and then it'll give you the two corresponding elements as element IDs. And this is a way of you quickly identifying within the act of the audit environment or the Revit editing environment what those elements are, particularly in complex models where it's very difficult to kind of navigate and get into the depth of the model for selections, okay? So using this ID now, okay, under the Manage tab, we can actually select by ID. So let's assume, again, we've received a clash report, or from, let's say, a structural engineer in Robot or Tekla structural designer. They may have also had an issue with a specific grouping of elements and given you the element IDs as well out of one of their reports, okay? So by pressing select by ID, we can put in the value of our ID, okay? And if we have multiple IDs we want to investigate, we can put in a semicolon and put in another ID afterwards. But in this instance, we're going to check the one. And when I press show, you will see that it's going to highlight in view the element that I'm looking to select. And once I press OK, that's going to confirm the selection. And you can see on the Properties tab on the left-hand side that I do in fact have that roller shutter door now selected. Okay, so that is step 1, how to select an element via element ID in Revit. Step 2, how to understand the directional drag selections of Revit. So we all know that we can select by merely dragging a box in one way or the other, okay? But I want to show you on screen here the difference between the directions of the drag and what they mean, okay? So if you drag from your top left to your bottom right, you will see that you get this, by default anyway, you get this solid square. And what this means is that this will allow you to select anything that falls within the overall boundary of what you're dragging. Okay, so the drag selection there, it's only elements. So if you look to the left hand side there at the bottom of that selection, you will notice that the roof light hasn't yet been selected. That's because the boundary of the selection box, when I click from top left to bottom right, hasn't included the entire object yet, and therefore hasn't made its way into the selection. But once I carry it down, you will see it becomes part of the selection. Okay, so when you click from your top left to your bottom right, or your bottom left to your top right, basically left to right, it is a selection that will only select all elements that are within the footprint or the bounding box of your selection. Okay, so you can see that that's a complete selection there. Now that says 63 items, but look at this. When we go in the opposite direction, when we go from bottom right to top left, you will see that it becomes a dash line. The presentation is different. And this means that every object, when you go from the bottom right to the top left, every object that crosses the path of the direction box, okay? So you look at the roof lights again. The moment the boundary goes across those elements, they become part of the selection. And this will always select a lot more data by default than the previous selection, okay? So it's got to do with the nature of your project. It's got to do with how you want to control the visibility. But top left to bottom right only selects all the elements that are enclosed within the bounding box, and bottom right to top left, the reverse of it, when you get the dash line, selects everything that the bounding box actually touches off of. Okay, so that was step 2, how to use the directional drag selection objects in Revit. Number 3, how to use filters to control your Revit selections. Okay, so if you look at the model again that we have in front of us, I can, for example, click and drag and select all those elements. Okay, but you'll notice that in the ribbon above, we get a contextual menu for modify multi-select arise. Okay, and it shows various warnings and that kind of thing, but it also has this little filter button here. And when we select the filter, it'll actually populate this table with all the categories of elements that are currently within our selection. And all we need to do in order to isolate one of those categories is to, let's say, for example, we could check none, and let's say all we want are windows. Okay, so I'm going to press apply to that and press OK, and you'll see that the roof lights and on the reverse side of the building, the 2 windows there, that is the sum of the selection, and we were able to get to that point merely by clicking the filter button once and then selecting the category. When you combine this with the hide isolate category or the hide isolate elements, okay, it becomes a very, very quick way of controlling the overall selection and presentation of elements that you are selecting. Okay, so it's just to be cognizant that we can actually really efficiently make selections en masse by pressing the filter option when we get our contextual dialog box opening in the ribbon, checking none, and in this instance I'm going to pick doors, I'm going to press apply, and you'll see that we now have 3 doors in the selection. Okay, so that was number 3, how to make selections in Revit using filters. Number 4, how to save and reload selections in Revit. So people don't realize this, but if you spend a long time creating a selection of objects, let's say, you can actually save that selection for later ease of access. So imagine in this instance that we wanted many roof lights there. Okay, so I'm going to use my filter as I did previously, and I'm going to check none, and I'm going to make sure that Windows is active. I'm going to press apply, and just on the inverse here, I'm just going to press shift and drag and remove those elements there. Okay, so we have a sum of 10 there. There's actually internal ones there, but I won't concern you with them for the moment. So we have our 10 elements there in our selection, okay? And if you look again at the contextual tab, you will see up beside filter, there's a little button that says save. And we can call this roof lights and internal windows, okay? And I'm going to press OK. So that selection has now been saved into the project information, okay? And from there, if we make, let's say, another selection at any given point, we can simply just press load and then select the filter that we've made in the project and press OK. And you will see that it's after selecting our current selection plus the selection group that we'd already saved, okay? Outside of that, when we go to our Manage tab, okay, you can go down to the selection option here if you don't want an additional selection to what you had saved, and we can press load and we can simply select our filters and press OK, and there we have it. Okay, so that is how to save a selection and then load or access that selection again at a later point. Number 5, how to edit selection filters in Revit. Okay, so as you can see from the last frame, we have our previous selection that we had saved. Okay, and here we can very simply, again in the contextual tab that arises on our ribbon, press edit. Okay, and you will see that we'll get a huge amount of filters. Okay, but when we go down through the rule-based filters and we minimize them, on the selection filters you can see that we have roof lights and internal windows. So I can select that because that is the name of our previous selection, and from there I can press edit. Okay, and in here you basically get a window that's akin to the grouping window. So if you haven't seen our video on groups, I've actually got two of them. You can see the little eye there in the whichever corner it shows up. Make sure and go and check them out because they're very detailed breakdowns of how to use groups and loads of tips and tricks around them. So if you want to leverage groups, make sure to check that out. But in this selection criteria here, you will see that we get a new contextual menu, and it'll say remove from selection, add to selection, finish or cancel. And what we can do is simply click add to selection, and we can introduce more of the roof lights. So we can pick one half of the roof lights there. Similarly, we could remove some of the elements if we wanted to, and we can press and finish our selection. We can press OK. And now when we load our selection, you will see that it's different. We've removed these elements down here, and we've added these roof lights at the bottom. Okay, so that was step 5, which was how to edit the selection filters within Revit. Number 6, how to select a chain of elements within Revit. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Revit can string multiple objects together in what's called a chain. Okay, so if you're drafting walls or anything like that, and you're going from end to end to end, Revit will actually produce a chain of walls. Okay, and the way to select a chain is actually quite simple. You can merely highlight one element of the chain. So let's say this middle wall. Okay, and I can press tab until the point that you may have to press it several times, but you will actually get the selection. So you can see chain of walls or lines actually comes up as the selection criteria. So by hovering over one of the walls, it selects all the walls that turn into that point that have similar or matching properties that go end to end in the chain. So I can select that, and you can see now that I've selected the full chain of walls by very simply hovering over one of them and pressing tab, and you get the full chain of selection. Okay, this also works for line-based elements. Okay, so for example, I can select this this tarmac. It's a floor at the moment, but when I press edit boundary, you will see that there's a drafted boundary here. Okay, and similarly, because it's a line and all the lines are going end to end, I should be able to hover over one line, press tab, and select the whole chain of lines that make up that tarmac road. Okay. Finally, this also works for likes of systems. So if you have a piping system or a ducting system, these will also work. So by simply pressing tab, once we have one element of a chain selected, it will allow us cycle through to the point that the full chain is highlighted, and then all we need to do is click once and we have selected the full chain of elements. So that's number 6, how to select a chain of elements in Revit. Number 7, how to select individual elements that belong to a linked model in Revit. So if you look at the file here, we have an architectural envelope for the light industrial unit, but I can also just hide, for example, this roof. Okay, and you'll see that we actually have a full structural frame for this as well. Okay, and when you try to select an individual element from a linked file such as this, typically what you'll end up doing is highlighting the entire thing. You might get lucky and sometimes it'll pick up what you want, but it's very difficult to get that selection because Revit's priority order means it's trying to select objects that are native in the parent model that you're in, probably behind the link. In this instance, it's trying to pick the wall behind, or it's going to select the full link. Okay, so let's just say, for example, that I wanted to select this beam member here, okay, of the portal frame. Okay, what we could do is when we highlight, when we kind of rest our cursor over the element, because it's a link, it may not select the individual element. So it might be trying to select the architectural envelope behind it, which is what it's doing at the moment, or it might try to select the full link. But if we tab again, we can actually cycle through the selection objects from where our cursor is, and it will at a point recognize that you're trying to select that individual element from the link, and then you can click and select it. So you'll see here on the properties tab, it's all grayed out. Okay, so all this information is grayed out. But That doesn't mean that this is like this information is locked to us. Let's say we can't edit the link within the parent model, but what we can do is, let's say we are bringing in a reference file from a subcontractor and they have information in that that's pertinent to your design information. You may want to just take that element into your parent model easily. So let's assume maybe this is a piece of equipment or something like that. We can press Control C to copy to the clipboard, and then we can click off at the space and we can go into Modify, Paste, align to same place. Okay, it's going to give me duplicate types. That's okay. I'm not concerned about that. But you can see now I actually have a native selection there, and you can see that we have this element that is now editable. It's no longer grayed out. So I'm going to set that top of parapet level to 0, 0 and watch the element move in space then. So what I've now done is I've introduced this beam directly out of the link into our parent model. Now, this will not edit the link. If you make edits in the parent model, you need to make sure that if there are elements that you want to stick for the project duration, that you relay these changes back to your link. It may not be correct. This is probably a bad working example in the sense that you probably shouldn't mix the disciplines like this. The architectural model is the architectural model and the structural model is the structural model. But you may, for example, have a reference architectural model from a specialist designer or something like that. They just want to take in individual elements, and that's how you can do it. So you can actually just use the tab tool when you're hovering your cursor over the selection to highlight something within a linked model, and then if you want, you can copy and paste it into your live environment. Okay, so that was number 7, how to select elements from a linked model. Number 8, how to select elements behind an element within Revit. Okay, so looking at this blockwork wall here, okay, and let's just say that we actually have layers of information in behind this blockwork wall. Let's say I want to select the return wall here, but I don't have access to the top of the view like that. What we can do is we can actually kind of highlight the element in front, and again, using the tab button, we can cycle through until we get the single selection of the element that's behind the primary element in the view. So in this instance, I'm selecting the cladding that is behind the blockwork wall, and then I can click and I have my selection. So it's that simple. All we need to do is press tab. If there's elements that are kind of layered or in the way of the element that you want to select, we can just press tab very slowly and cycle through the selection options until we go through the depth to get to what we want. Okay, so that is number 8, how to select elements behind other elements in Revit. Number 9 is how to select curtain wall elements in Revit. So you might have a file like this, and you might have a small glazed section of curtain walling, okay, and you're trying to select the individual elements to make edits so that you can kind of randomize the pattern, let's say, as I have done in this instance, okay. So if I was to hover over the curtain wall, you'll get the extents of the curtain wall. As you can see, this has been edited to suit the opening, and it's tied actually to the top level. There is reason for this. This isn't lazy modeling. I actually have these locked to the constraints of the bounding wall, so should they change, the overall dimensions of this curtain wall will flex in a way that I'd be happy with, okay. But in this instance, if I hover over the curtain wall, it's I can't select any of those individual items, and this comes back to the kind of base function of tabbing. So what I can do is I can hover over, let's say, the mullion, and I can press tab and it will select the mullion. More importantly, if I don't want to select and edit the mullion, if I wanted to select and edit the grid associated, I can tab once and then I can tab again, and you can see that I'll actually get that grid associated, and it'll give me a runner dimension to the next, and I can simply go in and change that value if I wish, and then that grid line position will change, okay. So by simply tabbing while hovering over the particular elements within the curtain wall that you would like to select, it will again, as in the previous instance, cycle through all the potential selections to the point that you can actually click the one that you want, okay. So that was number 9, I believe, yes, how to select elements within a curtain wall. Step 10, how to use the common selection methods in Revit. So this is something that is probably very familiar for majority of people watching, but when you select something in Revit, okay, you cannot maintain a multiple selection by just clicking. So historically, if you're a CAD user, you would have been able to click multiple elements and it would continuously add to your collective of your selection, if that makes sense. But in Revit, it'll only select the individual items. So what we actually need to do in Revit is, if we select the first item, we need to press Control, and you will see that you get a little plus on the cursor. and then you can select your next elements, and that will continuously add to your collective selection. Okay, and similarly, if we want to subtract, we basically press Shift, and we'll see a little minus beside the cursor, as you can see, and we can simply just deselect the elements that we don't want. Okay, so that is fundamentally the most primitive but the most used way of making selections in Revit. Okay, so that was number 10 on how to use the common selection methods in Revit. So number 11 is how to select all instances of an element within a Revit view. Okay, so again, using our example here, I am going to select one of the windows here. Okay, and when we right click, we get a whole host of options. Okay, but you'll see that we have select all instances, and we can select visible in view or in entire project. Okay, so when we select visible in view, you will see that we get a selection of 2 of the windows. You'll also see in the perspective section below here that those are also selected, but there's 8 of those window types total in the project, but you can see on the breakdown of properties there's only 2 in the selection, and that's because we're working within this view and we told it to only select all instances of that element that were visible to that view. Okay, so that was number 11 on how to select all instances of an element within a view. Number 12 is how to select all instances of an element within an entire project. Okay, so again, using the same view here as an example, I can select the element, right click, go down to select all instances and press in entire project. And the important thing to note that even though we're only seeing the 2 active windows on the properties bar, you will see that there's Windows bracket 8. Okay, and that shows that we've actually got a selection of 8 of these elements across the building. All right, so going into 3D view, you will see that that selection. So if I select previous, that selection is across all 8. Okay, and what's interesting about this is there's actually a short key for this as well. So when we press the window like that we want, and we want to select all instances in the entire project, if we just type in SA, it'll select all. But you'll notice again in the properties tab that we have 8 total selected. So when I go into the 3D view, I can select one of those, press SA, and it's going to check every instance. It's going to select every instance of that in the entire project. So that's a really handy way of selecting a collective of the same instance if you want to swap them out for a different type. So for example, we may want to change this down to a 910 by 910, and of course we'll break my reveals, but my sweeps, but that's besides the point. Okay, but you can see how quickly you can make edits once you make that select all instances in the project. So yeah, that was number 11, I believe. Or was that number 12? I think that was number 12. Step 13, how to reselect your previous selection. Okay, so mixing it up a bit, I'm going into the structural file here. So if I go to the 3D view here, okay, and let's just assume that I'm going to click and drag over these elements here. Okay, and I'm going to press filter, and I'm going to check none. I'm going to just press structural columns, structural foundations, just to keep things simple. Okay, so let's say I have this selection here, and I've been spending a bit of time, I've been adding to it over time, trying to be exact about my selection and make sure I get everything that I need within it. And then on accident, I click off and I lose my selection. Okay, if you do nothing else, there's a very, very simple way of regaining that selection. So if you right click in space immediately, you can literally go down and press the 4th option, which is select previous. And there you have your previous selection all there ready to go again. Okay, so that's a really, really useful tip, because I can't tell you how often you misclick, or it's a massive time saver if you're spending the time to go through and create your selection criteria properly. This is a godsend, you know. So that was number 13, and that was how to reselect your previous selection. Okay. Number 14, how to select Revit elements through a schedule. Okay, so as you can see on the structural model here, we have an overall 3D and the front sheets. Okay, and when I select, I've opened a steel column schedule here. It's just a provisional schedule. It's not the ones. I've actually got tonnage schedules associated to this model. Okay, but in this instance, I've just started opening another secondary schedule. Okay, and this schedule is just a standard steel column schedule, and you can see that it's not itemized by instance. Okay, but what I can do is if I select, let's say, the 406 UBDs here, okay, if I select that row, you will see that in the 3D model, all instances of that element are being selected directly from the schedule. It's highlighting where they are, okay? Similarly, you can see on the breakdown there, it shows structural columns and analytical columns 18. So it is actually selecting. It's the same as doing a select all instances function across the model, but you're just doing it through the schedule, okay? Better than that again is if I go into the edit type, sorry, if I go into the schedule here, and in the sorting and grouping, I turn on itemize every instance, I'll get a full breakdown of every instance of every member in the project. And then we can select per instance in the model. And you can see that as I'm progressing through here, it's selecting the corresponding column to this element on the schedule. So there is actually a way in the live data, in the live model environment, to make selections through your schedules. So this is a very, very powerful way of making selections when you, let's say, want to edit. A good example of this would be door families. You might have, not door families necessarily, you wouldn't edit the family, but you might want to edit the instance properties of that door family. And you could have hundreds of doors in the project that are all scheduled out. Trying to identify the location of the door within a larger model, or maybe multiple models that are interlinked, could be problematic. So what you can do is you can go directly to the schedule, highlight the one that you want, and it will, in a 3D view or any other view, make that selection for you. So it's interesting just to know that you can in fact do that. And when you have that selection, you can press BX or box, okay, and that command is also up there in the modify tab here under view, and that will automatically create a 3D box around just the elements that you have selected, okay? So it's a very, very powerful way of managing the data within the live model environment directly from your schedules. So again, if this was a door and I wanted to tell it to add a lock execution to it, or I wanted to add that parameter into the instance parameters, I wanted to turn it on and off directly from the properties rather from the schedule, I can do that and select it within the 3D environment to see how it's interfacing. So it's really, really powerful. It's very useful, and I recommend if you're doing a lot of scheduling in your projects, depending on the scale of them, you should schedule for automatic reasons to save you time and grief and Revit anyway. But if you have very large projects and it becomes difficult to identify things, I can't recommend this method of selection enough. It's very, very powerful across a project. So that was number 14, how to select relevant Revit elements directly from the schedules. So number 15 is just to let you know that you can actually give greater control to your selection tool within Revit, okay? So you'll notice in the modify tab here, okay, on the ribbon, there's a little drop down on the selection. And this actually gives you a greater control of how you can select elements, okay? So here, what I have is the default selection tool set and how it's set up. And this is actually what I recommend, because I've noticed that if you were to turn on, so you can select links, which means that you can turn that on and off in a project. If you don't want someone to, if you're let's say the BIM manager or a BIM coordinator across a team, and you don't want people freely selecting elements within external links, you can turn that off in the model, and you can instruct users not to turn that on, and they will not. Oh, well, actually, it might be. I think it's actually an instance option within the Revit toolbar, but you can instruct people to that select links is not available, okay, and then they have to turn it off, and they're just not able to actually tab select the link. You can also select underlay elements. So if you have elements that are specifically an underlay, sometimes they can be a little bit tricky to select using tab methodologies and stuff, and you can actually turn that on so that it makes the selection straightforward. You can actually immediately select the underlay, okay? You can select pinned elements. If, again, you are a BIM coordinator or a BIM manager and you're trying to manage a larger team, you may choose that to not allow people to select pinned elements. So you may choose, let's say, that grids and levels are rightfully pinned and only specific users should have access to editing them at any given stage in the project. Or the geometry, the walls, the position of the walls, and the let's say the rising wall, the external envelope, the structural frame, and then internal services within the kind of the eave location. They may all be pinned relative to a grid. They may all have a designated set out, and that dimension is locked and pinned, and that means that should the grid move, all of those elements move. So it could actually be quite a big project change for one element or part of the design to be updated, and in which case you may wish to ensure that your users are not able to move or select the pinned elements in the first instance, that they actually have to go through the proper channels within your organization, within your company, so that they can actually edit a pinned element. It's a mechanism for creating a dialogue so that people meaningfully converse about the design alterations of serious elements such as grids and levels and that kind of thing, things that are set out and locked relative to them. Outside of that, we have select elements by face. I never turn this on. I think this is weapon, to be honest with you. If so, you can see there that I can select these elements by face, and it's more picking the overall element. It's kind of picking from the corners, okay? But it's not so apparent to me. Like as you see, I'm hovering over the face of the rail there, and it's not selecting the rail when I'm hovering on the face. But if I turn that on, it's going to select that rail no matter where I have my cursor positioned over it. And to be honest with you, I find this really troublesome. I've noticed many a time that this, like if you're working in elevation or something like that, you really want to be picking the boundaries of elements to select them so that it gives you greater control rather than flippantly selecting things by face, because it just, in my experience, it's led to an awful lot of grief where users accidentally may do a click and drag or something like that purely because they accidentally selected an element by face and they pulled it just the way I'm after doing there. And as you can see, it breaks things. And you don't always get that warning to notify you. Sometimes a change will happen and Revit will see it as a non-consequential change. And that's because you had an element by face and you were working in a plane that was perpendicular to it, which means that you shouldn't have been able to select that element by face meaningfully. It just doesn't make sense, to be honest with you. So generally, I tend to leave that turned off. Drag elements on selection. This is a good one to turn off if you are relatively new to Revit. I think it's really good to habitualize the idea that you first make your selection and then you use the move tool. You either select move the tool or you press MV to bring it about, because I think it's a good habitual workflow. Clicking and dragging is really inaccurate compared to manually using the move tool and using alignments correctly. And where possible, I think all users should turn off drag elements on selections, particularly when they're new users or they're let's say lower intermediate, because again, it's a bad feeling when someone is relatively new to a project and they accidentally click and drag something and the whole team is frustrated, and there's no real reason for someone who is new to be given a hard time with something like that. When you have that kind of control in the project, you can just drop that off, okay? So I leave this personally as you see it. I leave that to defaults. I like the defaults, but I would recommend if you're new, you may want to turn that off and just get rid of that drag function so you can become much more intentional about your movements and your alignments and your trimming of elements, rather than kind of just grabbing and shifting things into a rudimentary position that you like the look of. So yeah, that was step 15, and number 15 I should say, and that's you can create different controls for how your selection tools work within Revit. Okay, so this is the end. I hope you enjoyed it. Look, you may have found this very easy. You may have not gotten a lot of value from this because you're experienced enough, and that's perfectly fine. However, if you're relatively new to Revit or you're just kind of getting to grips with it, I hope you see the efficiency gains that all of these selection methodologies can introduce into your workflows. It's better to be spending time on your design development and your detailing and your model integrity rather than just going through individually selecting items and getting frustrated. So yeah, learning your selection tools and becoming efficient with them is a massive gain on a daily basis, and over the year it compounds to a lot of time saved. So look, I hope that you found some value in that video. Okay, I have a corresponding article to this, you can see the link down below. You can go to that if you want to do kind of more linear, or have a base point if you want to save it into your browser. These models, as I said, are available from the Buy Me a Coffee page down below. That is actually a support page if you want to support me. If you're liking what I'm doing here, please, I would greatly appreciate it. As I said at the start, I think I put a clip in at the start of the video that I was out here entirely too early in the morning to be doing this. But look, guys, as ever, I appreciate the continued support in whatever way it is. If you have any suggestions of content you'd like to see, just leave them down below, get a conversation going as well. And make sure to check out the Discord chat. I'm after putting a link to the Discord chat in the description there. I want to get people who are really engaged, who want to learn, who want to help each other out, who want to develop and get a little community going there. Because, to be honest with you, I would much prefer to develop content that I'm requested continuously rather than develop content that I think is just good for the masses. You know, I'd much prefer to look after individuals who have specific needs where possible rather than just kind of putting out generic overall content, because there's a lot of that on the internet anyway. As ever, my name is Niall. This is 8020 BIM. I appreciate all the support. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Make sure to stay tuned for the next ones. And be good, mind yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.